Today, we are digging deep into the reports and analyses around, well, one of the biggest geopolitical power moves we've seen in years. I'm talking about the immediate fallout from Operation Absolute Resolve.
hmm
If you followed the news, you know that operation culminated in the capture of Nicolás Maduro on January 3rd. But the real story here isn't the operation itself. It's the seismic shift in U.S. foreign policy that came right after.
A shift that's impacting everything from Caracas to Havana.
And it's fundamentally changing the global outlook on the U.S. dollar. We're already seeing critics, especially international ones, throwing around this incredibly loaded term, annexation.
Exactly. And that's, our crucial task today. What we're doing here is synthesizing a complex set of sources to clearly define this alleged Don Roe doctrine.
This new framework.
It's the new framework guiding U.S. action. We need to understand how it applies to Venezuela and Cuba and, maybe most importantly, evaluate the incredibly high stakes for the USD's dominance.
So we're trying to give you that nuanced market and policy perspective you just won't find in the headlines.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's start there then. Let's define this central policy concept, the Don Roe doctrine. Our sources are all confirming this is the administration's modern, muscular interpretation of the historic Monroe Doctrine.
Right. Recently pushed by President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
So if the original Monroe Doctrine was about keeping European powers out, the Don Roe Doctrine is about asserting U.S. control in it.
It's asserting the Western Hemisphere as strictly, unequivocally, a U.S. sphere of influence, capable of administrative intervention when they deem it necessary.
And we saw that intervention almost immediately in Venezuela.
We did. And the official language they're using is just fascinatingly precise. It's almost designed to, thread a legal needle.
They're avoiding annexation.
Oh, completely. Because of the political and legal nightmare that would create. Instead, Trump stated the U.S. would explicitly, and this is the quote, run the country until a legitimate transition occurs.
Run the country. I mean, that's the phrase that gets everyone's attention. It sounds like an interim government role, but with no end date.
That is the tension. And to really understand the scope of running the country, you just have to follow the oil.
Ah, okay.
Our sources are pretty clear that the primary non-political engine here is the energy prize. The administration isn't being shy about it. They are there for Venezuela's massive crude reserves.
Trump's explicit statement was that U.S. oil companies are going into...
to fix the badly broken infrastructure and get the oil flowing.
Which sounds like technical assistance, but the intent... I mean, that implies some pretty deep control. What does fixing that infrastructure actually mean on the ground?
It means total administrative control over the energy sector, and not for a few months. We're talking potentially a decade or more.
A decade? Wow.
Venezuela's infrastructure is in absolute ruins. To fix it, the U.S. would need to bring in hundreds of billions in investment, provide security for all the facilities, rewrite all the laws.
So they're essentially creating a U.S. protectorate.
A deep one, where U.S. corporations, operating under waivers from Washington, control the absolute lifeblood of the Venezuelan economy, indefinitely.
So if the U.S. is controlling the resources, running the government's key functions, and doing it with no clear exit plan, I can see why critics are pushing back so hard.
Oh, they absolutely are. This moves way beyond standard intervention. It's a semantic battle in international law.
Right.
Like we said, formal annexation is highly unlikely. The cost of absorbing millions of citizens is just astronomical.
Yeah.
But critics, particularly in the growing BRICS plus bloc,
So China, Russia, Brazil.
they're all arguing that a long-term U.S. transition with no end date, driven by resource extraction, is, and this is their phrase, annexation in all but name.
So the distinction is razor thin. It's not about owning the land. It's about owning the governance and the profits.
Precisely. The argument is that if you dictate the Constitution, the central bank, and the energy contracts for an indefinite period, you functionally absorb that nation's sovereignty. It doesn't matter if you plant a flag or not.
And that legal debate is what rivals will use to justify any countermeasures they take.
Exactly. It's not academic. So for you, the listener, the key thing to understand here is that in Venezuela, the Don Roe Doctrine means indefinite, corporate-driven resource control, all packaged as a transition.
And that transition didn't happen in a vacuum. The Don Roe Doctrine quickly found its next focal point, Cuba. Soon after Maduro's capture, Secretary of State Rubio issued a very pointed warning that the government in Havana should be concerned. He explicitly cited Cuba's historical support for Maduro.
This is the domino effect strategy in action. Venezuela's support was a crucial lifeline for the Diaz-Canel regime. It gave them subsidized oil, cash flow.
And the U.S. administration is aiming for a complete systemic collapse in Cuba.
That's the goal.
But hold on, Cuba has survived massive economic pressure and blockades for decades. What makes this particular domino effect theory credible now, based on the sources?
It's the combination of the timing and the pretext. The administration isn't just linking the Cuban regime to political support for Maduro. They're using broader accusations of narco-terrorism and, crucially, foreign interference.
Foreign interference from who?
They're specifically mentioning Chinese intelligence sharing and a Russian military presence. So by wrapping this economic pressure in the language of national security threats, they justify a severity of action that goes way beyond historical blockades.
So it's a different application of the doctrine. Venezuela was an immediate administrative takeover for resources. Cuba is layered pretexts to justify total economic strangulation, hoping the regime just implodes on its own.
Exactly right. And the U.S. has already tightened the existing blockade, trying to accelerate that collapse. If Maduro's oil spigot is gone, the Cuban economy just becomes instantly more fragile.
And this is where the policy discussion really veers into speculation. But it's speculation built on precedent, which makes it a little unsettling. I'm talking about the discussion of territorial aspirations.
Yes. Our sources are clear. There is absolutely no official plan for a military annexation of Cuba. But President Trump's past very public interest in purchasing Greenland has sparked a lot of conversation.
Right? I remember that.
The theory is that if the Cuban government were to completely collapse into chaos, he might pursue a territorial arrangement. Not a military seizure, but a financial transaction to secure a permanent strategic U.S. foothold.
It's a bizarre precedent, isn't it? Who would have thought the desire for an Arctic island would become a weird potential template for Caribbean policy? It suggests a really transactional view of national borders.
It certainly does. It signals that this doctrine isn't just about influence. In the extreme case, it could be about reshaping ownership, whether through indefinite administrative control in Venezuela or, potential direct purchase of a failed state in Cuba.
And in both cases, the goal is total regional security and control over resources and strategic choke points.
Vitally, yes.
That kind of control isn't just a regional issue, though. It immediately changes how the rest of the world values the U.S. dollar. So let's transition to the global economy.
Okay.
Because this aggressive, almost expansionist posture, it puts the USD's status as the global reserve currency at a major crossroads. The administration frames this as a security and energy necessity, but the risks of blowback are enormous.
They are. And financial markets, they don't care about diplomatic niceties. They care about risk, cost, and stability.
Right.
And we have specific data from our sources outlining 3 distinct scenarios for the dollar based on how this plays out. It's a vital risk matrix for anyone tracking global finance.
Okay, lay them out for us. What's the best case scenario for the dollar?
That would be scenario 1, quick transition.
And what does quick mean here in terms of market perception?
It means resolution within about 18 months. Maduro's gone, U.S. oil companies are drilling and exporting, and crucially, the new government in Caracas is seen as stable enough to take over. The U.S. military footprint shrinks.
And the impact.
It's a strong boost for the dollar. Markets would love this. They appreciate the decisive resolution, what some are calling a Pax Americana, where stability is quickly restored and U.S. companies secure a massive, reliable oil supply.
So the market rewarding strength and decisive action, but if it drags on?
If it drags on, the perception changes dramatically. That brings us to scenario 2, prolonged occupation.
And the impact there is weakness for the USD.
Weakness, yes. This is driven by the immediate Iraq 2.0 fear, a long, costly, messy stabilization effort that just bleeds the U.S. Treasury.
The costs aren't just military, right? It's the whole nation-building burden of running a bankrupt, hostile nation like Venezuela.
Exactly. If this thing lasts 3-4 years, continuous high military and administrative costs could balloon the U.S. deficit, and that weakens global confidence. The dollar gets dragged down with it.
That makes perfect sense. The cost of endless occupations is a known currency killer. But the third scenario, that's the one that introduces existential volatility.
It is. It's the outlier, but it's the most damaging risk.
Yeah.
Scenario 3, aggressive expansion.
Which means the U.S. moves from administrative control towards something like formal annexation or
it triggers direct, visible military action against Cuba. The impact here is high volatility. The reasoning is that this action would immediately trigger a broader geopolitical conflict. It would draw in major players like Russia or China who have strategic interests and assets in the region.
So the moment the market fears a kinetic conflict between major powers, what's the immediate trade? Where does the money go?
It's a massive immediate flight from the dollar. Investors would rush into traditional safe havens like gold, but also, and this is significant, into digital assets.
Okay, what do you mean by digital assets here?
Two things. First, decentralized cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, which are seen as politically neutral. But second, and maybe more importantly, you'd see an aggressive acceleration of state-backed digital currencies, CBDCs, from rivals like China.
As direct non-dollar alternatives.
For international trade, yes, the volatility would be staggering.
So if we step back, the overarching risk is one of perception. If the world starts to see the U.S. not as a global leader, but as a territorial expansionist, that sets off alarms about imperial overstretch.
And that perception is the specific catalyst for de-dollarization. If nations believe the U.S. is prioritizing resource control over stable financial management, they will aggressively seek alternatives.
The movement that's already being led by China and Brazil?
It would gain massive, likely irreversible momentum. They already see the U.S. weaponizing the dollar through sanctions. Expansionism is just another proof point that they need to escape that reliance.
This has been an incredibly fast-moving situation. This deep dive really highlights that the stakes just could not be higher, not just regionally, but for the entire structure of global finance.
Absolutely. The tension at the heart of the Monroe Doctrine is that core conflict. The U.S. is projecting strength, which traditionally supports the dollar. But in doing it this way, it risks being seen as unstable and aggressive, which is the exact fuel de-dollarization needs to catch fire.
The world is watching to see which side of that razor's edge the U.S. ultimately lands on.
It really is.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. If U.S. companies are now going into Venezuela to get the oil flowing, how will the international community and global energy markets ultimately define the U.S.'s legal right to control that resource? Is this a temporary service contract or a permanent claim on national wealth? And what does that distinction mean for the security of energy assets in every other politically unstable but resource-rich nation worldwide? Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.